After one of the surviving students came forward and revealed the truth behind the tragic events of 27 years ago, the parents of the missing children finally found both closure and a glimmer of hope. With Audrey's testimony and the police reopening the case, they would soon uncover the true horror of these trafficking rings and realize just how vast these operations remain to this day. The investigation would reveal that this case was far from over, and that some of the students might still be out there, alive but trapped in exploitation. How many of them were still out there? And would they finally manage to bring down the horrific operation responsible for the disappearance of an entire class? Before we dive into part 2 of this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. The morning sun filtered through the curtains as Laura moved about her house, going through the motions of her daily chores. It had been less than 24 hours since the shocking revelations at the police station, and her mind was still reeling from everything that had transpired yesterday. The weight of the truth that her daughter Rory had died shortly after being kidnapped sat heavily on her heart. Yet there was also a strange sense of relief in finally knowing what had happened after 27 years. As she wiped down the kitchen counters, Laura's gaze fell on her phone sitting silently nearby. She realized she had left it on silent mode since the previous night, not wanting any interruptions as she processed her swirling emotions. Picking it up, she saw 3 missed calls from the police department. Her heart rate quickened. Had there been new developments already? Laura quickly dialed the number back, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the phone to her ear. When the call connected, she recognized the voice of Officer Jensen. "Mrs. Calloway, thank you for returning our call," he said. "I apologize for disturbing you so early, but we have some important updates. We'd like you to come down to the station again today at 10 a.m. We've reached out to the other parents as well. There will be a gathering to discuss the new information and leads we've uncovered." Laura glanced at the clock. It was already 9:05 a.m. "Of course, I'll be there," she assured the officer. "Thank you for letting me know, Detective." After hanging up, Laura hurried to get ready. She showered quickly and changed into fresh clothes, her mind racing with possibilities of what new information might have come to light. As she grabbed her purse and keys, she paused by the framed photo of Rory on the entryway table. Her daughter's smiling face looked back at her, forever frozen in time. "I'm not stopping to get justice and answers for you, sweetheart," Laura whispered, gently touching the frame. "I promise." The drive to the police station was a blur. Laura found herself gripping the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white as she navigated the familiar streets. When she arrived, the parking lot was already packed with cars. She circled for several minutes before finally finding an empty spot near the back. As soon as Laura entered the station, she was struck by the bustling atmosphere. Officers hurried back and forth, their faces etched with determination. Clustered in small groups throughout the lobby were other parents. Many of them Laura had recognized from the victim's family support group, but there are a few others that she didn't. The air was thick with a mixture of tension, grief, and desperate hope. Before Laura could get her bearings, she felt a hand on her arm. She turned to see Helen, her eyes rimmed with red, but her expression resolute. "Laura, thank goodness you're here," Helen said, pulling her friend into a quick embrace. "Come on, they want us inside, but—" She lowered her voice, glancing around. "Prepare yourself, the other parents. They're going to want details about Audrey, about everything. It might get intense." Laura nodded, steeling herself. "We need to support Audrey through this," she murmured. "She's been through so much already." Helen squeezed her hand. "Absolutely. But not everyone will take this news kindly after 27 years of uncertainty. We need to be ready for anything." As they made their way through the crowded lobby, Laura could feel the weight of stares upon them. A few parents approached, their faces a mixture of hope and desperation, as they began to pepper her with questions. But before Laura could respond, several officers appeared, gently but firmly guiding everyone towards a large conference room on the upper floor. "Please, if you'll all follow us," one of the officers announced. "We'll be starting the briefing shortly." Laura and Helen exchanged a look before following the crowd. As they entered the conference room, Laura's eyes immediately fell on a familiar figure seated at the front, Audrey. The young woman looked pale and nervous, flanked by police personnel and what appeared to be higher-ranking officers. Laura's heart went out to her, knowing how difficult this must be. They took their assigned seats at the front of the room, next to Audrey and the officers. Matthew joined them a moment later, giving Helen's hand a reassuring squeeze as he sat down. The room quickly filled with other parents, their hushed whispers creating a low hum of anticipation and anxiety. As Laura settled into her chair, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unreality wash over her. Just yesterday, her world had been turned upside down. And now, here they were about to share that earth-shattering truth with all the other families whose lives had been forever altered by that fateful day 27 years ago. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that no matter how painful, the truth was better than a lifetime of uncertainty. They were finally on the path to answers, and hopefully someday to justice. The room fell silent as a high-ranking officer stepped to the front, his face grave but compassionate as he surveyed the gathered families. Laura felt her heart rate quicken, knowing that the lives of everyone in this room were about to change irrevocably. "Good morning, everyone," the officer began, his voice steady and clear. "I want to thank you all for coming on such short notice. We've asked you here today because we have significant new information regarding the case of the missing children from 27 years ago." A ripple of murmurs swept through the room, quickly hushed as the officer continued. "Yesterday, we received testimony from a survivor of the kidnapping." He gestured to Audrey, who seemed to shrink slightly under the sudden attention of every person in the room. "This brave young woman has come forward with crucial information that has allowed us to finally understand what happened that day, and in the years since." The officer paused, his expression softening. "I want to prepare you all. What you're about to hear is difficult. It may be shocking, and it will certainly be painful. But we believe that, after 27 years, you deserve to know the truth." With that, he stepped aside, inviting Audrey to take the microphone. Laura watched as the young woman stood on shaky legs, her face pale but determined as she faced the room full of grieving parents. Audrey's voice trembled slightly as she began to speak, recounting the horrors of that day and the years that followed. Laura closed her eyes, the familiar knot of grief tightening in her stomach as she listened to the details once again. Even though she had heard it all before, the pain was no less acute. As Audrey described how the children were taken to brothels and forced into exploitation, Laura's thoughts wandered to Rory, her beautiful, vibrant daughter, whose life had been tragically cut short. In a bittersweet way, she felt a sense of gratitude that Rory and Sally hadn't endured prolonged suffering. The idea of her child facing years of abuse and that kind of exploitation was almost unbearable. A choked sob from across the room jolted Laura back to the present. A woman had raised her hand, her face twisted in anguish as she asked about her daughter, Mia Stanton. Laura's heart clenched as she watched hope flicker and then shatter in the woman's eyes when Audrey reluctantly revealed Mia's fate. It had been 2 years ago, on Mia's 32nd birthday. She had been lured with the promise of higher pay for her work that day, only for it to end in brutality. One of the customers had beaten her so severely that she hadn't survived. Other parents asked about their son, and Audrey clarified that she had no information regarding the male students. They were separated as soon as they reached the warehouse. A senior officer supported her statement, confirming that, unfortunately, they have not yet found a direct lead on his whereabouts. Based on the additional information gathered from the principal, they believe they were likely sent to multiple locations in Mexico for forced labor, or potentially even farther. The room was thick with grief and shock. Parents clung to each other, some weeping openly, others sitting in stunned silence. Laura found herself reaching for Helen's hand, drawing strength from her friend's presence. As Audrey continued her testimony, Laura felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The stark reality of what these children had endured, what Audrey had endured, was almost too much to bear. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing and push back the bile rising in her throat. The briefing stretched on for what felt like hours. After Audrey finished her statement, Laura, Helen and Matthew took turns sharing their part of the story, how they had encountered Audrey, the photograph that had sparked their suspicions, and the confrontation with Principal Lillian Brooks. Throughout it all, Laura couldn't help but notice the range of reactions from the other parents. Some listened with rapt attention, hanging on every word. Others seemed almost angry, as if they couldn't quite believe or accept what they were hearing. A few directed accusing glares at Audrey, causing Laura to bristle protectively. Just as the tension in the room seemed ready to boil over, the officers announced that they were bringing in Principal Lillian Brooks. The atmosphere shifted immediately, a current of shock and anger rippling through the crowd as the disgraced educator was led into the room. Lillian looked small and defeated, a far cry from the confident administrator Laura remembered. As she began to speak, admitting to her role in the tragedy and explaining her motivations, Laura found her attention drawn to a figure seated at the back of the room. It was a man she didn't recognize, youngish with a short army-cut hairstyle and glasses, dressed casually in jeans and a black top. What caught Laura's attention was the way Lillian's gaze kept darting to him, a flicker of fear in her eyes each time. Laura frowned, trying to place him. Was he one of the parents? She couldn't recall ever seeing him at any of the memorials or support group meetings over the years. As the briefing drew to a close, Laura watched the mysterious man slip quietly out of the room. She made a mental note to ask the officers about him later, unable to shake the feeling that his presence was significant somehow. The police wrapped up the session by assuring the families that the investigation was being reopened with renewed vigor. They promised to pursue every lead, to leave no stone unturned in their quest for justice. As the room began to clear, Laura could see the toll the morning had taken on everyone. Faces were drawn and tear-stained, shoulders slumped with the weight of newfound knowledge. Yet beneath the sorrow, Laura sensed something else, a spark of determination, a collective resolve to see this through to the end. After 27 years of uncertainty, they finally had a direction, a target for their grief and anger. It wasn't closure, not yet, but it was a start. As the crowd of shell-shocked parents began to disperse, Laura found herself drawn to where Audrey stood with Helen, Matthew, and a cluster of officers. The young woman looked utterly drained, her eyes red-rimmed and her shoulders slumped. "I should have said something sooner," Audrey was saying, her voice choked with emotion. "Look at how much pain I've caused, how much hurt. They all hate me now. I've failed my friends all over again." Laura's heart ached at the self-recrimination in Audrey's voice. She stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the young woman's arm. "That's not true, Audrey," she said firmly. "You've given us hope. You've given us closure. Yes, it's painful, the truth often is, but you haven't failed anyone. You're incredibly brave for coming forward." Audrey looked up at her, tears glistening in her eyes, but the way they looked at me, some of them were so angry. "They're processing," Helen chimed in, her voice gentle. "It's a lot to take in. Give them time. What matters is that you've done the right thing, even though it was difficult." As Audrey nodded, still looking uncertain, Laura's mind drifted back to the mysterious man she'd seen during the briefing. She turned to one of the nearby officers. Jensen, she realized with relief. Someone she'd come to trust over the past day. "Officer Jensen," she began, "there was a man in the room during the briefing. Young, short hair, glasses, wearing jeans and a black top. Do you know who he was?" Jensen's brow furrowed. "We registered everyone who came in today. I don't recall anyone matching that description." Laura described the man in more detail, including how Principal Brooks had seemed afraid of him. As she spoke, she noticed Audrey's expression change, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "I didn't see him," Audrey said slowly, "but the way you're describing him, it sounds like someone Lillian mentioned to me once, but I forgot the name. She always seemed scared when she talked about him." Jensen's expression grew serious. "We'll look into it," he assured them. "In the meantime, Audrey, I think it would be best if you remained in protective custody for a while longer, just to be safe." Audrey's face fell. "But I have a job, a life. I can't just put everything on hold indefinitely." "It would only be for a few weeks, maybe a month," Jensen explained. "You could still go about your daily activities, but We'd have officers keeping an eye on you from a distance, and we'd limit visitation. Given what we've learned, we can't be too careful." After a moment of hesitation, Audrey nodded reluctantly. "All right," she agreed, "if you think it's necessary." As they wrapped up the conversation, Laura couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The appearance of this mysterious man, Lillian's fear of him, the need for continued protection, it all pointed to the fact that this case was far from over. They had uncovered one layer of truth, but Laura suspected there were still depths yet to be plumbed. Over the weeks that followed, Laura found herself caught in a whirlwind of activity. There were frequent visits to the police station, meetings with detectives, and sessions with the newly formed support group for the victims' families. She, Helen, and Matthew had taken it upon themselves to organize these gatherings, recognizing the need for a safe space where parents could process their grief and anger together. The investigation progressed rapidly. Through Lillian Brooks's testimony, the police gained valuable insights into the trafficking ring that had taken the children. Laura learned that the man she had seen was named Talker, an influential figure in the operation, a ruthless manipulator with ties to numerous establishments across Texas and Mexico. Lillian revealed that he was a skilled conman who never used his real name. To everyone, he was simply Talker. Days blurred into weeks and weeks into months. With each passing day, Laura felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. They were making progress, yes, but the full scope of the horror was becoming increasingly clear. By the end of the first month, the police had rescued 3 more victims from the missing school bus case. They were found in different brothels locations across Texas and Mexico, each rescue bringing a bittersweet mix of relief and sorrow. But not everyone made it. For each life saved, there was another lost. Laura and Helen worked closely with law enforcement, helping coordinate with families as remains were identified and returned to those whose loved ones had not survived the years of suffering. As the second month drew to a close, Laura received another call from the police station. She and Helen were asked to come in that afternoon. When they arrived, they were ushered into a private room where Audrey was waiting, flanked by officers. "It's been 60 days, Audrey said as soon as they entered, her voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. "My protective custody period is over. I want to go back to my normal life." Laura could see the conflict in the young woman's eyes, the desire for normalcy warring with the fear of what might be waiting for her outside the safety of police protection. Officer Jensen, who had become a familiar face over the past months, spoke up. "We'd prefer if you stayed in the safe house a bit longer, Audrey. We still haven't located Talker, and until we do, we can't be certain of your safety." Audrey shook her head firmly. "If he was going to come after me, he would have done it by now. I never even met the man. I was just a pawn in all of this. I can't live my life in fear anymore. I won't." Laura watched as Audrey signed the papers refusing further protection, her heart heavy with worry. As much as she understood Audrey's desire to reclaim her life, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were all still in danger as long as Talker remained at large. As they prepared to escort Audrey back home, Laura and Helen exchanged a knowing look. They understood that they couldn't shoulder the entire burden of keeping her safe, but after everything she had been through, they refused to leave her to face it alone. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street as Laura's car pulled up behind the police cruiser outside Audrey's modest apartment building. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the constant buzz of activity they'd grown accustomed to over the past 2 months. As Audrey stepped out of the police car, Laura could see the young woman's shoulders visibly relax, as if she was shedding the weight of her protected status, along with the confines of the vehicle. Laura and Helen exchanged a glance before following Audrey up the worn concrete steps to her second-floor apartment. The lock stuck for a moment, protesting after 2 months of disuse, before finally yielding with a reluctant click. The musty smell of neglect hit them as soon as the door swung open. A fine layer of dust coated every surface, and the air felt stale and heavy. Audrey stood in the doorway for a moment, her eyes roaming over the familiar yet somehow foreign space. "It seems like I'm back to a load of chores," Audrey said with a sigh and a smile. Without a word, Laura and Helen rolled up their sleeves, determined to help her settle back in. When they offered their assistance, Audrey didn't object, and soon they fell into an easy rhythm, Laura tackling the kitchen while Helen focused on the living room. The silence between them was comfortable, broken only by the rustle of a trash bag or the soft swish of a duster as they worked together. Audrey moved from room to room, touching things as if to reassure herself that this was real, that she was truly home. Her fingers trailed over book spines, picture frames, the soft fabric of curtains as she cleaned them. By the time the apartment was in a more livable condition, the sun had dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. Audrey, looking more relaxed than Laura had seen her in weeks, stretched and yawned. "I don't know about you two," she said, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "but I'm starving, and after 2 months of safe house food, I'm craving something with actual flavor." She paused, her eyes lighting up with sudden inspiration. "There's this burger place I used to love. It's a bit of a drive, but God, their food is amazing. What do you say we celebrate my return to freedom with some real food?" Laura hesitated, glancing at Helen. The idea of venturing out, especially to an unfamiliar area, made her slightly uneasy, but the hopeful look on Audrey's face was hard to resist. Before Laura could respond, Helen's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression softening. "It's Matthew," she explained. "He's asking if I can come home for dinner. He's been working on transforming Sally's old room into a reading nook for us." She looked torn, clearly wanting to support Audrey, but also drawn to the idea of spending time with her husband. "Go," Laura said gently, squeezing Helen's hand. "I'll stay with Audrey. We'll be fine. You deserve some time with Matthew." "You're right," Helen said thoughtfully. "After all this, it's the first time we're taking a step forward while still holding on to Sally's memory. The reading nook would be a perfect place to honor her. Sally loved to read, remember?" Laura and Audrey nodded. Helen gave them both a quick hugs before departing, leaving Laura and Audrey alone in the freshly cleaned apartment. The three of them had grown close over the past months, but this would be the first time they'd be truly alone together. As they got into Audrey's car, which took a few tries to start after sitting idle for so long, Laura couldn't shake a niggling sense of unease. But she pushed it aside, determined to support Audrey in this small step towards normalcy. As they drove, Audrey filled the silence with chatter, telling Laura about the place they were heading to and raving about the burgers they were about to enjoy. But as they entered a decidedly rougher part of town, Laura's discomfort grew. The streets became narrower, the buildings more dilapidated. Graffiti-covered walls and boarded-up storefronts became more common, and Laura found herself instinctively checking that the car doors were locked. "Audrey," she said hesitantly, her eyes scanning the graffiti-covered walls and boarded-up storefronts, "are you sure this is the right area? It seems a bit run down." Audrey's eyes flickered with something, sadness, nostalgia, before she nodded. "Yeah, it's not the nicest neighborhood, but trust me, the food makes up for it." As they turned onto a particularly desolate street, Audrey suddenly pointed to a boarded-up building. "That was the brothel where I used to," she said, her voice tight. "Looks like the police really did shut it down." Laura's heart clenched, the weight of Audrey's words echoing the years of exploitation she had endured. The yellow police tape still surrounded the property, fluttering faintly in the evening breeze. A notice was plastered on the door, its words indecipherable from this distance. Laura found herself wondering about the other women who had been trapped there, where they were now, if they had found the same chance at freedom that Audrey had. Before Laura could respond, Audrey was pulling into a small parking lot in front of a dingy-looking diner. The neon sign above the door flickered weakly, spelling out "The Weissburger" in garish red letters. The irony of the name wasn't lost on Laura, given the neighborhood's apparent character. "I know it doesn't look like much," Audrey said, noticing Laura's apprehensive expression, "but I promise the food is incredible." As they stepped out of the car, Laura couldn't shake the unease feeling. The street was eerily quiet, with only a few other patrons visible through the diner's grimy windows. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was here for Audrey, to support her in reclaiming her life. The bell above the door jingled discordantly as Laura and Audrey stepped into the diner. The interior was dimly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights casting a sickly glow over the worn booths and chipped formica tables. A faint smell of grease and stale cigarette smoke hung in the air, making Laura wrinkle her nose. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Laura noticed that the diner was nearly empty. A lone man hunched over a cup of coffee at the counter, his face hidden beneath the brim of a worn baseball cap. In a booth in the far corner, a couple sat close together, speaking in hushed tones that ceased abruptly as Laura and Audrey entered. The woman's eyes darted towards them before quickly looking away, a gesture that sent a chill down Laura's spine. Before Laura could voice her growing discomfort, a waitress appeared, her face lighting up with recognition as she saw Audrey. The woman was in her mid-40s with streaks of grey in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes that deepened as she smiled. "Well, look who it is," the waitress exclaimed, pulling Audrey into a quick hug. "We were starting to think you'd forgotten about us, honey." Audrey returned the hug, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "Never, Lola. How could I forget the best burgers in town?" As the two women chatted, catching up, Laura found herself studying the waitress more closely. There was a warmth to Lola that seemed at odds with the dingy surroundings, a motherly air that made Laura wonder about her story. How had she ended up working in a place like this? Did she know about Audrey's past? "Oh, where are my manners?" Audrey said suddenly, turning to Laura. "Lola, this is Laura. She's a friend, Laura. This is Lola. She always took good care of us girls when we came in here." Laura extended her hand, trying to keep her expression neutral as she processed Audrey's words. "Us girls." She was referring to the other trafficking victims, Laura realized with a pang. The casual way Audrey spoke about it, as if every fiber in her bones had accepted the fact, made Laura's heart ache. Lola's handshake was firm, her smile genuine. "Any friend of Audrey's is welcome here," she said. "Now let me guess, 2 Vice specials with all the fixings." Audrey nodded enthusiastically. "You know me too well, Lola." As Lola moved away to place their order, Laura leaned in close to Audrey. "Are you sure about this place?" she whispered, her eyes darting around the dingy interior. "It seems connected to your past. Is that healthy?" Audrey's expression softened. "I know it might seem strange," she said quietly, her fingers tracing patterns on the worn tabletop. "But this place, Lola, they were bright spots in a really dark time. The food is great, yeah, but it's more than that. This was one of the few places where we were treated like people. The brothels have rules, you know. The top-performing girl would get treated every month. I know it sounds odd, but that's what happened." Laura nodded slowly, trying to understand. The idea that this rundown diner had been a sanctuary of sorts for Audrey and the other victims was both heartwarming and deeply sad. It spoke volumes about the life Audrey had been forced to live, and how little Laura understood of such an existence, that a greasy spoon diner could become a symbol of normalcy and kindness in a world so devoid of both. As they settled into a booth, the vinyl seats cracked and patched in places. Laura couldn't help but notice Lola engaged in a hushed conversation with another waitress near the kitchen. The other woman, younger and more nervous-looking than Lola, kept glancing in their direction, her expression unreadable. Laura felt a chill run down her spine, but she pushed the feeling aside, telling herself she was being paranoid. When Lola returned with their food, the aroma of perfectly grilled beef and melted cheese filled the air. Despite her misgivings about the place, Laura had to admit that the burger looked and smelled incredible. The bun was toasted to a golden brown, the cheese melted just right, and the patty was thick and juicy. As they ate, Audrey shared the diner's history with Laura. "This place has been here forever," she explained between bites, her eyes drifting into a distant gaze. "It's kind of an open secret in the neighborhood that a few girls from the brothel would come here after hours just to enjoy ourselves. To most people it was free entertainment. For others it was beneath them to share a table with someone like us. But for a lot of us it was the only place we could go where we felt, I don't know, a sense of freedom. Of course the goons still come with us. We're never that free." Laura listened, her heart aching for the young women who had found solace in this unlikely place. She tried to imagine what it must have been like for them, living lives of constant fear and degradation, finding moments of respite in a dingy diner over greasy burgers and fries. It was a stark reminder of the world Audrey had survived, a world that Laura, despite all her involvement in the case, could never truly understand. The savory aroma of the Vice Special burger lingered in the air as Audrey pushed her empty plate away, a satisfied smile on her face. Laura was still working on her meal, savoring each bite of the admittedly delicious burger. "I'm going to head to the back to wash up," Audrey said, wiping her hands on a napkin. "Maybe chat with some of the waitresses I know. It's been a while since I've seen them." Laura nodded, her mouth full. She watched as Audrey made her way towards the restroom area, which was situated just next to the kitchen. The young woman disappeared around the corner, leaving Laura alone at the table. As Laura finished her meal, she realized that Audrey had been gone for quite some time, and the diner's now empty. The earlier guests had left, and only Laura was in the dining hall. She glanced at her watch, noting that nearly 15 minutes had passed. A small knot of worry began to form in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. Audrey had mentioned wanting to chat with her friends. Surely that's what was keeping her. Still, an uneasy feeling persisted. Laura decided to check on Audrey just to be safe. She made her way to the restroom, pushing open the door and stepping into a dimly lit space. The atmosphere inside was a stark contrast to the diner proper. The walls were adorned with posters of scantily clad women, and the lighting was low and sultry. Laura felt a wave of discomfort wash over her, but reminded herself that given the neighborhood, this theme wasn't entirely unexpected. She entered one of the stalls, closing the door behind her. As she did, her eyes fell on a framed poster directly in front of her. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the subject. It was Audrey, posed in a minimalist nightdress, her expression a practiced mix of seduction and vulnerability. Laura felt a deep sadness settle in her chest as she was reminded of the life Audrey had been forced to lead. Suddenly, the sound of the restroom door opening broke through her thoughts. Laura listened, expecting to hear Audrey's voice, but there was only silence. "Audrey, is that you?" Laura called out, remembering that they had been the only customers in the diner. When no response came, she assumed it must be another patron who had just arrived. Quickly finishing up, Laura opened the stall door, ready to step out and wash her hands. But as she emerged, strong hands suddenly grabbed her from behind. Before she could react, her wrists were bound with zip ties and a cloth was shoved into her mouth, effectively gagging her. Panic surged through Laura as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Where was Audrey? Why was this happening in a public place like a diner? The men, their faces hidden from her view, roughly pushed her out of the restroom and towards the back of the kitchen. As they passed through the dining area, Laura's eyes darted around desperately. The diner was still empty, no other customers in sight. She wanted to scream, to call for help, but the gag in her mouth reduced her cries to muffled whimpers. From the back kitchen, they reached a back door, and for a moment, Laura thought they were going to take her outside, perhaps to a waiting vehicle. But when the door opened, it revealed a narrow corridor. To the right, she could see another door that likely led outside, but her captors turned her to the left, towards a narrow staircase leading upwards. In a desperate attempt to free herself, Laura tried to use the confined space to her advantage. She attempted to knock the man behind her off balance, hoping to create enough chaos to escape. But her hopes were dashed when she felt the cold, sharp point of a knife pressed against her back. "Don't try anything stupid," a gruff voice warned. "Keep moving." With no other choice, Laura began to climb the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing with fear and confusion about what awaited her at the top. As they reached the top of the stairs, Laura found herself facing another door. It swung open from the inside, and immediately her senses were assaulted by loud, pulsating music. The contrast was jarring. She hadn't heard a thing from the diner below, a testament to how well insulated this hidden room was. Her captors roughly pushed her inside, and Laura's eyes widened in horror at the scene before her. Audrey was there, bound and tied to a pipe pole. When their eyes met, Audrey began to struggle against her bonds, shaking her head frantically, and shouted curses to the men. The men around her just laughed at her futile efforts. Laura was forced into a chair a few feet from Audrey, her hands secured tightly. As she looked around the room, trying to make sense of the situation, her gaze fell on a familiar face, the man she had seen at the police gathering, Talker. He stood there, a satisfied smirk on his face, flanked by Lola and the other waitress Laura had seen earlier. Suddenly everything clicked into place. This wasn't just a diner, it was part of Talkie's operation. That explained why the women from the brothel were allowed to visit. The entire establishment was under his control. Talker walked up to Laura, his eyes shining with a cruel sense of victory. "Ah, what do we have here?" he said, his tone oozing with insincere politeness. "The fish have finally come to our pond, the woman who's been methodically tearing down my empire one piece at a time." He nodded to one of his men who removed Laura's gag. "Go ahead," Talker taunted, gesturing around the room. "Scream all you want, this room is completely soundproof." Laura's eyes darted around, taking in the foam-covered walls. Her heart sank as she realized the truth of his words. Even if she screamed at the top of her lungs, no one would hear her. "If you kill us," Laura said, her voice shaky but determined, "the police will find you. They'll know it was you." Talker laughed, the sound chilling in its lack of humanity. "Oh, my dear," he said, shaking his head as if explaining something to a child. "Don't you see how many men I have here? Faking an accident for a woman your age isn't difficult. Or perhaps we'll create an interesting story involving your friend Audrey here. The possibilities are endless." Laura's disgust must have shown on her face, because Talkie's grin widened. "You think I'm a monster, don't you?" he asked. "But you don't get to where I am without becoming one. Money, girls, power. They all come with a price." He leaned in close, his breath hot on Laura's face. "And do you want to know the best part? This place is still standing because I have a faithful dog in the police force. Your precious law enforcement isn't as clean as you think." Laura felt as though the air had been knocked out of her. She had spent months working alongside the police, but now doubt crept in. Could one of them really be on Talk's side? Detective Jensen, Officer Martin. Names and faces swirled in her mind, and in that moment she felt uncertain of who she could truly trust. Audrey cried from another side of the room where she was tied into the pole. "No, please." She seemed Audrey's frantic cries echoed from the far corner of the room, her body twisted and bound to the pole, her face streaked with sweat and tears. "No, please," she begged, her voice desperate, shaking with a mix of fear and anguish. "You never came for me. I've escaped your brothel for so long, so many years, and you never sought me out. I came here multiple times, and I never knew you were the one behind this place, so why now?" Talker stood there, unmoved, the faintest trace of a smile playing on his lips, as he slowly walked toward her, his gaze cold and calculating. The words hung heavy in the air between them. He stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms with deliberate slowness. His voice, when he spoke, was low and venomous. "You think I didn't know where you were all this time? That I didn't watch you?" Audrey's breath hitched, her wide eyes filled with disbelief as she tried to understand his words. "You were always so eager to run, and it became a pain in the ass to keep you inside." Talker continued, his tone laced with dark amusement. "So I let you go. I told my men to let you go. I told Lillian to watch you for me, but you never realized. I knew exactly where you were. I knew every move you made." Audrey's face contorted in confusion and pain, her mouth trembling as she tried to speak, but he raised a hand, cutting her off. "But then that woman showed up," he said, pointing to Laura, "and you and Lillian started talking, revealing everything, telling the police all you knew. Well, that changed everything. The cops were suddenly sniffing around, breathing down my neck, getting too close." Audrey's eyes widened at the mention of Lillian's name, her heart pounding in her chest. "Then why didn't you come for me sooner?" she demanded. "You must have known where the police kept me under witness protection. You said you had your dog in there." Talker stepped closer, casually picking at his nail. "I kept quiet," he continued, his gaze turning colder, "because there were bigger things at stake. If I'd drawn attention to myself, it could have ruined everything, my empire, this place." He gestured around the room, his eyes gleaming with contempt. But you see, all patient men are eventually rewarded. You two just happened to walk right into my hands today, unexpectedly." He laughed. "It's true what they say. Pigs return to their vomit, and victims return to where they were hurt. What a sad little thing you are." He began pacing the room, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I should have never purchased any of these children from that class. The whole case attracted too much attention. The police were forced to act, and now they're trying to shut down my entire operation." He slammed his fist against the wall, causing both Laura and Audrey to flinch. Torquay's eyes narrowed as he turned back to face them. "We should have just stuck to the illegal immigrants," he hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "It's much easier to make them disappear without anyone noticing or caring. No families searching, no media coverage, no police investigations that can't be bought off." Torque stepped closer, his voice a sinister whisper now. "You should have enjoyed your freedom, Audrey. Be a good girl and listen to your principal. Now I'm going to make sure you regret your heroic act, starting with that old woman first." Torque sauntered over to a table in the corner of the room, whistling casually, before returning to Laura's chair with a tray in hand. On the tray sat a gun, a knife, and a cup filled with folded papers. "How about we play a little game?" His smile grew wider as he held up the knife for everyone to see. "Perfect," he said, his voice filled with sadistic glee. "You know, the police have shut down 5 of my 12 illegal brothels in Texas and Mexico. I think it's only fair that you suffer 5 stabs, 1 for each establishment you've cost me." Laura felt her blood run cold as the reality of her situation sank in. She was going to die here, in this soundproofed room above a dingy diner, and no one would ever know what happened to her. She had no husband, no children. Helen might look for her, but that would only put her in danger too. As Torquay approached with the knife, Laura's eyes were shut tight, tears streaming down her face as she braced herself for the pain to come. She could hear Torquay's footsteps growing closer, the soft sound of the knife cutting through the air as he toyed with it. Suddenly, another voice rang out, sharp and clear. "Stop! Drop it!" Laura's eyes flew open to see Lola standing there, a gun pointed directly at Torquay. The waitress's hand was shaking, but her grip on the weapon was firm. "Let them go," Lola demanded, her voice trembling but determined. "Or I swear to God I'll shoot." Torquay's expression shifted from shock to amusement. "Lola, Lola, Lola," he said, shaking his head. "Do you really think you have it in you to pull that trigger? After all these years of loyal service?" "I mean it," Lola insisted, taking a step closer. "I'm done being part of this. I'm done watching you hurt people. Audrey's my friend." Laura watched the standoff with bated breath. The other men in the room seemed frozen, unsure of how to react. The other waitress looked on with wide, fearful eyes. Torquay's amusement quickly turned to anger. "Don't play dumb," he snarled. "You know what happens if you don't put that gun down right now. She dies first." He gestured towards Audrey with the knife. Lola's resolve seemed to waver for a moment, but then she steadied herself. "If you don't let Laura and Audrey go, I'll shoot you," she said, her voice stronger now. Torquay's eyes narrowed. He made a subtle gesture to his men, clearly signaling them to grab Lola. But before they could move, Lola released the gun's safety with an audible click. "Don't move," she warned. "I'll shoot, I swear it." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, with a barely perceptible nod from Torquay, his men lunged towards Lola. The sound of a gunshot echoed through the room, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. Laura flinched, her ears ringing. When she opened her eyes, she saw Torquay laughing. The bullet had missed him, instead embedding itself in the padded wall behind him. "You see?" Torquay taunted. "You don't have it in you, Lola. Now be a good girl and put the gun down. You've wasted the only bullet in there." But Lola stood her ground, her face pale but determined. Torquay's expression darkened. "Fine," he spat. "If you want to play hero, I'll deal with you myself. I'll end you first." He gestured for his men to step aside, scoffing that he didn't need their help to end a woman's life. With startling speed, Torquay lunged at Lola. Laura watched in horror as Lola stumbled backward, her finger pulling the trigger again. This time the bullet struck true. Torquay's eyes widened in shock as he faltered, but even as he fell, Torquay managed to reach Lola. With the last of his strength, he plunged the knife into her chest. Lola gasped, the gun slipping from her fingers as she collapsed. The room fell into stunned silence. Torque lay motionless on the floor, a growing pool of blood spreading beneath him. Lola, her breath coming in ragged gasps, managed to take a few stumbling steps towards Audrey before her legs gave out. Audrey, still bound and gagged, began to sob uncontrollably. The sound seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the room. Suddenly, everything erupted into chaos. The men in the room sprang into action, rushing to their fallen leader. One of them, a burly man Audrey recognized as Mitchell, knelt beside Torque, checking for signs of life. Just then, a crackling noise filled the room. In the tense silence that followed Torquay's fall, someone had turned off the music, and now they could all hear a voice coming from what seemed to be a phone. "Ma'am? Are you still hurt?" The voice of a 911 operator rang out clearly. "We've sent officers to your cell's location that we were able to track." The men exchanged panicked looks as they realized what had happened. Lola must have called 911 before confronting Torquay. They had no way of knowing how much the operator had heard, but the threats and gunshots would have been unmistakable. Mitchell quickly found the phone in Lola's pocket and ended the call, but it was too late. In the distance, they could hear the wail of approaching sirens. "What do we do now?" one of the men asked, his voice high with panic. Mitchell's face hardened. "We finished the job," he said, reaching for the gun that lay on the floor between Torquay and Lola. "We kill those two and get out of here." But another man grabbed his arm. "Are you crazy?" he hissed. "The cops are already here. If we kill them now, we'll just be adding murder charges to whatever else they've got on us. Torquay's empire is falling apart. We shouldn't make it worse for ourselves." Mitchell shook off the man's grip, his eyes wild. "You're all cowards and idiots," he shouted. "We're hidden up here. The police can't find or hear us, and we have staff downstairs who won't let them search the place. We can still get away with this." He turned the gun in his hand, checking the chamber. His face twisted in anger as he realized it was empty. "That bastard," he muttered. "Torquay was bluffing about there being only one bullet. The woman shot one and I thought there must be more, but now he got the last one inside him." Mitchell tucked the empty gun into his waistband and was about to reach for the knife again. But before he could take another step toward Laura and Audrey, a loud knock echoed from the door. The men froze. "It's probably just the staff warning us about the police," one of them said, though he didn't sound convinced. Cautiously, they opened the door. To their shock and horror, they found themselves face to face with a team of heavily armed police officers. "Freeze, police!" the lead officer shouted. The other men immediately raised their hands in surrender, but Mitchell wasn't ready to give up. He lunged for Audrey, pointing the gun against her throat. "Don't move!" he yelled at the police, "or I'll kill her!" The officers held their position, guns trained on Mitchell. "Drop the weapon," one of them said calmly. "You have nowhere to go. Don't make this worse for yourself." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, unexpectedly, a man spoke up. "The gun," he said, his voice shaking. It's empty." Mitchell's head whipped around to stare at him in disbelief. "You rat," he spat. "You're all headless idiot." The man flinched but stood his ground. "It's over," he said. "Torquay is dead. Don't be stupid and get us all more jail time." With those words, the fight seemed to go out of Mitchell. The gun clattered to the floor as he raised his hands in surrender. The police moved swiftly, securing the room and arresting the men. As one officer began to untie Laura, she could hear others calling for backup and paramedics. In the chaos that followed, Laura's eyes met Audrey's across the room. Despite the horror they had just endured, she saw a flicker of hope in the young woman's eyes. They had survived. Against all odds, they had made it through. As she was helped to her feet, Laura's gaze fell on Lola's still form. The waitress's sacrifice had saved their lives. Laura silently vowed that Lola's bravery would not be forgotten. The cool night air hit Laura's face as she was led out of the diner, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the hidden room upstairs. The street outside was a flurry of activity, police cars with flashing lights, curious onlookers being held back by yellow tape, and the wail of approaching ambulances. Laura watched as Torquay's men were led out in handcuffs. They were quickly loaded into waiting police cars. The rest of the diner staff, looking shell-shocked and confused, were also being questioned and detained. More police cars arrived, their sirens cutting through the night. Laura saw a team of paramedics rush into the building, no doubt heading upstairs to tend to Torquay and Lola. Another pair of paramedics approached Laura and Audrey, guiding them to a nearby ambulance. As they sat on the edge of the vehicle, blankets draped over their shoulders, the paramedics began to check them over. "Laura! Audrey!" a familiar voice called out. Laura looked up to see Detective Jensen hurrying towards them, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning them for visible injuries. Laura nodded, feeling a sudden urge to tell him everything. The words spilled out of her in a rush, how they had come for a simple lunch, how it had turned into a nightmare. She recounted Torquay's words about having someone in the police department, how that was why the diner hadn't been shut down. She explained how Torquay and his men had been hiding there all along, how they had been waiting for the right time to take revenge. Detective Jensen's face hardened as Laura spoke, his expression growing more intense with each word. When she finished, he took a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in before replying. "If Torquay's got someone in the department," he said, his voice low but firm, "that's a serious problem. We'll need to question everyone who might be involved and investigate the officers carefully. No stone can be left unturned. If he's managed to plant someone in the force, we need to find out who it is and how deep it goes. It would also explain why we haven't been able to locate the other brothel." He muttered, his mind racing through the possibilities. He paused, then met her eyes with a quiet resolve. If there's someone inside, they've been covering his tracks. Laura's hands trembled as she tried to steady herself. "He said he was going to stab me 5 times, she said, her voice shaking. 1 for each of the 5 brothels out of 12 that had been shut down. That means there are still 7 more illegal brothels. We'll likely get some leads from the men we detained today," Detective Jensen said, his voice calm but urgent. "1 or more of them will probably reveal the whereabouts of the male students. I believe that some of them could have knowledge about where the boys were sent. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for." "We owe it all to Lola," Audrey sobbed, her voice trembling with grief. "If Lola hadn't stepped in—" She paused, wiping her eyes. "She was always the only one who was kind to us, and now she's gone." Laura reached out to comfort Audrey, her own eyes filling with tears. "It's not your fault," she said softly. Audrey shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "It feels like everywhere I go I bring trouble, like I'm cursed or something." "No," Detective Jensen said firmly. "Not cursed. Think about it. Because of you, Torquay has been caught. His entire operation is crumbling. You've saved other girls and other families." Laura nodded in agreement, squeezing Audrey's hand. Then a thought occurred to her. "Detective," she said, "how did you find us?" The room was soundproofed. Detective Jensen reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. He held it out to them. On it, in hurried handwriting, were the words, "Save upstairs, PLs." "We found this at the cashier's counter," Jensen explained. Audrey's eyes widened in recognition. "That's Lola's handwriting," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "She must have left it there before. She had planned to rescue us." Jensen nodded solemnly. The 911 operator also told us that Lola had made a discreet call and kept the line open. "We heard everything Torquay said. Lola's quick thinking saved your lives." As the reality of their narrow escape sank in, Laura and Audrey clung to each other, overwhelmed by gratitude for Lola's sacrifice and relief at their own survival. The paramedics continued their examination, checking Laura and Audrey's vitals and tending to their minor injuries. As they worked, Laura saw another group of paramedics exiting the diner. They were carrying 2 stretchers, each bearing an ominous body bag. Laura's heart sank as she watched them load the stretchers into the back of an ambulance. "We're done here," the paramedic attending to Laura said, drawing her attention back. "There's no sign of shock or concussion, just some minor wounds. But if either of you experiences any pain or discomfort in the next 24 hours, you should go to the hospital immediately." Laura and Audrey nodded, confirming that they hadn't been forced to take any substances and that the only violence they had endured was being tied up and gagged. Detective Jensen approached them again. "Let's get you both out of here," he said gently. "We'll need you to come to the station to give your statements." He turned to Laura. "Do you want me to call Helen and Matthew for you?" Laura considered for a moment, remembering Helen's mention of a date night with her husband. Despite everything that had happened, she couldn't bring herself to interrupt their evening. "No, not now," she said. "They deserve their time together. We can contact them tomorrow." Detective Jensen nodded in understanding. "All right, I'll have an officer take you to the station. The team there will take your statement. I'm needed here to examine the other evidence." He led them to a waiting police car, where another officer was ready to drive them. As they settled into the back seat, Laura watched through the window as Jensen rejoined the investigation team still working at the diner. As the car pulled away from the curb, Audrey spoke up, her voice still shaky but with a hint of her usual spirit. "Well," she said, attempting a weak smile, "at least I got to taste their burger one last time. Guess I'll have to find a new favorite place now." Before Laura could respond, the officer driving them chimed in. "Don't you worry about that," he said, his tone friendly. "If I knew you wanted burger so badly, I would have suggested you to a joint burger not far from the station. That's the real best burgers in town, if you ask me." Despite everything, Laura found herself chuckling. "Now that sounds like the safest burger place on earth," she said, "being so close to the station and all, unlike the one we just left." The shared moment of levity helped to relieve some of the tension, but as they fell silent again, the weight of the day's events settled back over them. As they drove through the quiet streets, Laura gazed out the window, her mind replaying the events of the day. She thought about Lola's bravery, about Audrey's resilience, about the long road of healing that lay ahead for both of them. But amidst the trauma and the fear, she also felt a glimmer of hope. They had survived. Torquay's empire was crumbling, and the man could never hurt anyone again. And while there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead, Laura knew that they had taken a significant step towards justice and healing. As the city lights blurred past the window, Laura silently renewed her commitment to seeing this through to the end. For Rory, for Sally, for Audrey, and for all the other victims whose lives had been forever changed by Torque's cruelty.